Have you ever stayed in an Airbnb and felt like something wasn't right? What if there was a room you weren't meant to open, a room that could change everything? Would you try to unlock it or walk away? It was supposed to be the perfect getaway for Sarah and Daniela, a quiet, secluded Airbnb in the middle of nowhere. They arrived on October 12th, 2024, around 5:30 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the old farmhouse. The house had an eerie charm, with creaky wooden floors and vintage furniture that hinted at years of forgotten memories. But from the moment they arrived, something felt off. The air was too still, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The host was a peculiar figure, friendly but overly cautious, warning them about the out-of-bounds areas and giving vague instructions about certain parts of the house they were not allowed to enter. When he handed them the keys, he mentioned an old locked door at the end of the hall, but quickly brushed it off, stating it wasn't important. By 9 p.m., after unpacking and settling in, Sarah noticed something odd, a door at the far end of the hallway, hidden behind a faded curtain. It wasn't part of the tour, and it wasn't listed in the house description. Daniela, not as disturbed, thought it might just be a closet. But when they realized it was locked and remembered the host's strange warning, a chill crept over them. Sarah, why was it off limits? What was behind it? That night, around 2:30 a.m., Sarah woke to a faint scratching sound coming from behind the door, followed by whispers that seemed too distant to understand. She tried to ignore it, but the noises persisted, growing louder, more frantic. The next day, October 13th, 2024, at 10 p.m., after a restless day of exploring the area, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them. The air seemed heavier, and she couldn't stop thinking about that locked door. What could be behind it? And why was the host so secretive about it? Unable to ignore the tension any longer, Sarah grabbed the old key left by the host. Her heart pounded as they approached the door, the air thick with dread. At 11:30 p.m., they turned the key. The door creaked open with an ominous groan. Inside, they were met with an unsettling sight. The room was an exact replica of their living room. The same furniture, the same wallpaper, even the same curtains. But the most chilling part, there lying motionless on the couch, was a figure that looked eerily like Sarah. Daniel stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. Who is that? The figure on the couch slowly turned its head toward them. Its eyes were wide open, empty, lifeless. The room seemed to close in around them, the air growing colder. Before either of them could react, the door slammed shut, locking them inside. The figure slowly sat up, its gaze fixed on Sarah, as if it knew everything about her. The house groaned again, as if it was alive, holding them captive. In that moment, Sarah and Daniel realized they weren't just trapped in a room, they were trapped in something far more sinister. What had they uncovered? Was it a warning? Or was it a curse that had been waiting for someone, anyone, to unlock that door? Would you dare to open the door, knowing what could be waiting for you on the other side? Or would you walk away, never to return? Have you ever stayed in an Airbnb, expecting the perfect weekend getaway, only to realize that something was terribly off? What if the host wasn't just absent? What if they weren't even human at all? A group of friends, Emma, Jake, Sophie, and Liam, had been looking forward to their weekend getaway for months. They had booked a beautiful remote Airbnb nestled deep in the woods, perfect for relaxing away from the stress of city life. On October 10th, 2024, they arrived at the cabin just after 4 p.m., eager to unwind. The place was stunning, surrounded by towering pines, with large windows that offered breathtaking views of the wilderness. They immediately fell in love with the space, especially the open kitchen and cozy living room with the stone fireplace. Everything about the house seemed perfect. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cabin, they realized that the host had not arrived to greet them. This wasn't unusual. The listing had mentioned that check-in instructions would be sent via text. By 6:30 p.m., they received their first message. "Make yourselves at home. I'll be watching over you." The message felt a little strange. but they brushed it off, thinking it was just a quirky way to welcome guests. As the evening wore on, the friends settled into the cabin. At 9 p.m., they decided to make use of the hot tub, a feature they were particularly excited about. But as they approached the back deck, they noticed something strange. There was a note on the hot tub, written in a neat but hurried script. "Stay inside after dark, it's not safe." They laughed it off, thinking it was just a prank. But something about the tone of the message made them uneasy. By midnight, they were back inside, enjoying some drinks and laughing in the living room. It was then that they received another message from the host. "I'm watching you. Don't forget." The group chuckled nervously, unsure if they were being pranked, but there was a slight chill in the air and an overwhelming sense of being watched. They decided to go to bed, hoping to shake off the unease. The next morning, on October 11th, 2024, they woke to find that the host had sent another message at 7 a.m. "The woods are beautiful in the morning light. Take care not to stray too far." The message was cryptic, but at that point, the group decided to enjoy their stay. They went hiking through the surrounding woods, trying to put the odd messages behind them. But even as they walked through the trees, it felt like they weren't alone. The forest seemed to be alive with whispers, and every time they turned a corner, it felt like someone or something was watching them. As dusk approached, they returned to the cabin, only to find the door slightly ajar. Inside, everything was undisturbed, but it was clear someone had been there. The feeling of being watched intensified. At 8 p.m., the next cryptic message arrived. "You shouldn't have gone out." They tried to laugh it off, but there was no denying the growing sense of dread. That night, at 11:30 p.m., Sophie woke up to the sound of footsteps outside her window. She looked out into the darkness, but saw nothing. When she returned to her bed, the room felt unnaturally cold. In a panic, she rushed to wake the others, but they found nothing, no sign of anyone outside. That's when Liam noticed something chilling. The phone was showing an incoming call from the host, but when he answered, there was only silence on the other end. The next morning, the host sent another message at 6 a.m. "I warned you, now you'll never leave." The friends rushed to pack their things, eager to leave, but as they tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. The lock was jammed, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't open it. They were trapped. It wasn't until noon that the door finally clicked open. They rushed out into the daylight. As they made their way back to the car, they saw a shadow, watching them from the window. A figure standing just inside the cabin, staring out. But when they turned to look again, the window was empty. The host had never shown his face, and now they realized they may never know who or what had been watching them all along. The cabin, once their dream getaway, had become their nightmare. Was the host even human? Was he ever even there? Would you have stayed? Or would you have left before the weekend could even begin? Have you ever stayed in a beautiful old house, only to discover that it's hiding something you weren't meant to find? What if that hidden place was connected to your own past? On November 5th, 2024, Emma, a solo traveler, arrived at a charming historic Airbnb nestled in the heart of a quiet village. She was looking forward to a peaceful weekend retreat in this cozy, centuries-old house. The owner, an elderly woman, greeted her warmly and handed over the keys with a cryptic smile, saying, "Enjoy the peace here, but don't wander too far." Emma didn't think much of the warning. The house was beautiful, full of antique furniture, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and a fireplace that crackled with warmth. By 10 p.m., after a long day of traveling, Emma retired to her room, ready to get a good night's rest. But around midnight, she woke to the sound of faint creaking. It wasn't the usual sounds of an old house settling. These were rhythmic, deliberate, steps echoing through the walls. Emma sat up in bed, straining to listen, but the noises stopped as suddenly as they had started. Her curiosity piqued, Emma decided to investigate. As she wandered the dimly lit hallways of the house, the creaking returned, leading her to a small hidden door near the kitchen. The door was half covered by a faded tapestry, almost as if it had been deliberately concealed. With a slight push, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dusty staircase descending into darkness. At 2 a.m., after a moment of hesitation, Emma decided to descend. The air grew colder with each step, the floor creaking beneath her feet. When she reached the bottom, she was greeted by an unfinished, dust-covered floor. It looked as if no one had set foot there in years. Broken furniture, old trunks, and weathered photographs littered the space. Sheets hung over forgotten relics of another life. Emma felt a chill run down her spine, but pressed on, compelled by an undeniable pull. As she explored further, she noticed a worn journal on an old desk, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping through it, Emma found the story of the house's former occupants, an affluent couple who had lived there in the early 1900s. Their names were Arthur and Margaret Wilder. The journal detailed the tragic loss of their daughter Lily, who had died unexpectedly, leaving the couple devastated. It was said that Arthur was so grief-stricken, he sealed off the floor where Lily had spent most of her time, never allowing anyone to enter again. Emma's heart raced as she read the final pages of the journal, where Arthur mentioned a strange connection to the house. He believed Lily's spirit still roamed the halls, unable to rest. As Emma finished reading, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She turned around quickly, but no one was there. Suddenly the air grew thick, and the creaking sounds returned, this time louder than ever. The floor beneath her seemed to shift. Emma's eyes darted to a corner of the room where she saw a figure, a young girl with pale, lifeless eyes, standing motionless. The figure didn't move, but Emma's blood ran cold. The child's gaze fixed on her, and she realized with horror, this was Lily. The figure's mouth opened slowly, but no words came out. Emma's pulse quickened as she backed toward the stairs. The air was suffocating, the temperature dropping rapidly. She turned and fled up the stairs, but as she reached the door, she saw something written on the wall in what appeared to be dust and grime. "I was waiting for you." At 3:30 a.m., Emma slammed the door shut, her breath ragged and heart racing. She bolted it and backed away, staring at the closed door. The silence that followed was deafening, but the presence of the hidden floor still loomed over her. Was Lily's spirit truly haunting the house? And if so, why did Emma feel such a deep connection to her? By 7 a.m., Emma left the house, her mind still racing with questions. The next morning, she spoke with the host about her discovery, but the woman seemed unfazed. "The house has its stories," she said cryptically. "Some stories are meant to stay hidden." As Emma drove away, she glanced back at the house, now bathed in the soft light of dawn. But a shiver ran down her spine as she realized something unsettling. The house wasn't just hiding a hidden floor. It was hiding a past that might have been tied to her own. How could she feel so connected to the spirit of a child she had never known? And why had the house's secrets chosen her asterisk to uncover them? What if the place you thought was your peaceful retreat turned into a maze of confusion and fear? What if you couldn't trust what you were seeing, hearing, or even feeling? Would you ever escape? On November 15th, 2024, Rachel and Tom arrived at a charming, isolated Airbnb for a romantic weekend away. They'd been looking forward to this trip for months, far from the bustle of city life, nestled in the rolling hills, with nothing but the sounds of nature surrounding them. They arrived at 4:30 p.m., eager to unwind and explore the cozy house. The host, an elderly man, had greeted them warmly and showed them around the quaint property, offering them a homemade pie as a welcome gift. Everything seemed perfect at first. However, as the sun began to set, an eerie feeling settled over the house. Time seemed to stretch and warp, as though it was moving differently inside. At 8 p.m., after settling in and having dinner, they decided to take a stroll around the property. But as they walked through the garden, they encountered an older couple standing near the gate. The woman smiled at them, introducing herself as Jane and her husband as Peter. "We're just here for the weekend as well," she said cheerfully. But there was something unsettling in the way they looked at Rachel and Tom. Their story didn't quite make sense. Didn't they see the couple arrive earlier? Wasn't the house empty? Pushing aside their unease, Rachel and Tom returned to the house. But the odd encounters didn't stop there. At 10:30 p.m., just as they were about to settle in for bed, they heard the soft sound of footsteps outside their door. When Tom opened it, he found a woman standing in the hallway, her clothes tattered, looking confused. "Oh, sorry, I thought this was my room," she mumbled, brushing past them. She seemed familiar, though neither of them had seen her before. When Rachel asked her who she was, the woman replied, "I'm staying here. Isn't it beautiful?" Her eyes, however, were hollow, as though she didn't quite belong. As the woman walked away, Rachel and Tom exchanged uneasy glances. What was going on? The night stretched on, and the strange occurrences became more frequent. At midnight, there was a knock at the door. This time, it was a man who introduced himself as David, claiming he was there for a business trip. But his story was just as vague as the others. He couldn't seem to remember exactly how long he'd been staying, and the details didn't add up. He even mentioned that he'd already seen them earlier in the evening, which was impossible because they hadn't left the house. "Maybe we're just imagining things," Tom suggested, trying to reassure Rachel. But as the hours dragged on, it became clear that something was wrong. The couple who had checked in so excitedly just a few hours ago now felt trapped in a place that didn't obey the rules of time or reality. The house felt endless, as though each room connected to another, looping back on itself. They couldn't escape the strange encounters, and each new person they met seemed to get more out of place. At 2 a.m., Rachel woke up to find the entire house dark and silent. But when she tried to wake Tom, she couldn't find him. Panicking, she searched through every room, but there was no sign of him. The house was empty, except for the creeping feeling of something or someone watching her. As she walked through the long, empty hallways, the strange faces began to appear again. Jane and Peter, the woman who had mistaken their room. David. They were all standing at the end of the hallway, watching her with cold, vacant eyes. "Rachel," a voice whispered, barely audible, but unmistakably Tom's. "You have to leave." But when she turned around, the hallway stretched farther than it should have, and she found herself back in the same room she had started from. She was stuck. Was it a dream? Was she trapped in some kind of nightmare? Suddenly, a new voice cut through the silence. This one wasn't from a person she had seen before. It was coming from behind her, in a room she had never entered. "Welcome to the never-ending check-in," the voice echoed. In that instant, Rachel realized the terrible truth. They were not staying in a house. They were staying in a place between worlds, a limbo where time had no meaning and no escape existed. Every guest who had ever stayed had become part of the twisted loop, forced to relive their arrival over and over, forever stuck in a cycle of distortion. The smiling faces, the vague stories, the sense of disorientation. It was all a trap. At 5 a.m., Rachel found herself standing outside the house again, the sunrise painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. But when she looked down the driveway, she saw Tom waiting for her, looking just as confused as she felt. "Wasn't this where we started?" she asked, her voice trembling. But Tom only nodded, his face pale. "I think we're trapped here," he whispered, "and we may never leave."